Officer Mark Tanner, a man who'd once worn his badge with pride, now found himself weighed down by bitterness and resentment. Years of witnessing the darker sides of humanity had chipped away at his idealism, leaving behind a jaded man with little empathy left. This particular Friday night had been rougher than usual, and he ended his shift with a stop at the Rusty Nail, a dingy bar tucked into the city's forgotten corners. It was a place where officers, criminals, and the average down-and-out citizen occasionally rubbed shoulders in the dim, smoke-hazed interior. Here, Mark could hide, pour his grievances into whiskey, and drown out his dissatisfaction with the world. The bar was crowded that evening, but Mark sat alone in his corner booth, staring blankly into his glass. The low hum of muffled conversations, clinking glasses and laughter formed a cacophony that seemed to echo his own inner chaos. He'd been coming to the Rusty Nail more frequently, using its shadows to conceal his growing anger. Each drink intensified his sense of injustice, stoking a fire that had been burning for years beneath the surface. Mark's life hadn't turned out the way he had envisioned. Years in the force had worn him down, and his frustrations were increasingly focused on what he perceived as threats to his own way of life. Deep down, Mark knew his job had isolated him, and his prejudices had only grown stronger over time. When he looked around the bar, he saw a world he felt was slipping out of his grasp. As the clock ticked past midnight, Mark was on his fifth glass, nursing a bitter sense of self-pity. In his mind, the city had become a place full of ungrateful people, disrespectful citizens, and rising tensions that he blamed on those who didn't belong. He thought back to his early days in the academy when he'd wanted to protect and serve, not knowing that the very badge he took so much pride in would one day feel like a weight around his neck. With each drink, his resentment grew, and the lines between right and wrong blurred further. Stumbling out into the chilly night air, Mark's vision swam, but his heart pounded with adrenaline and misplaced anger. As he tried to steady himself, he spotted a figure crossing the street. In the dim light, all he could make out was a tall, well-dressed black man seemingly absorbed in his phone. Mark's instincts kicked in. Not the instincts of a protector, but those of a man looking to release the pent-up rage bubbling inside him. 2. A chance encounter. As Officer Mark Tanner stepped out of the bar, the cold night air hit him like a splash of icy water, momentarily clearing the haze of alcohol from his mind. The streets were quiet, lit only by flickering street lamps casting long shadows on the pavement. The usual sounds of the city, the hum of late-night traffic, distant sirens, and the rustle of leaves, seemed muted as he staggered slightly, trying to regain his balance. His eyes settled on the figure of the man across the street, illuminated by a nearby lamp. The man was tall, his well-tailored suit contrasting sharply with the drab surroundings. Mark squinted, trying to make out more details through the alcohol-induced fog in his mind. He noticed the man had an air of confidence, strolling with purpose while engrossed in his phone. It was a sight that both intrigued and irked Mark. In that moment, all the frustrations that had been brewing inside him erupted like a volcano. The man's mere existence, seemingly unbothered by the troubles Mark felt burdened by, sent a jolt of anger through him. He felt as if the world had conspired against him, and this man was a symbol of everything he despised: success, composure, and a life untouched by the anger and struggles that plagued his own. Mark's heart raced, not just from the whiskey coursing through his veins, but from a sense of twisted purpose. He took a few unsteady steps toward the man, his breath coming in short bursts. "Hey!" he called out, his voice slurred but loud enough to echo in the empty street. The man looked up, momentarily startled, but quickly regained his composure. He raised an eyebrow, clearly curious but cautious about the approaching figure. "Yeah, you!" Mark shouted, a sneer forming on his lips. The man stood still, assessing the situation. Mark's perception was clouded by both alcohol and a sense of entitlement. He felt justified in his approach, fueled by the sense of power that came with wearing a badge, even if it was now tarnished by his actions that night. "Got something to say?" the man asked, his tone calm, almost challenging. Mark felt his pulse quicken as he took a few more steps closer, the adrenaline pumping through his veins, igniting a sense of bravado. He felt like he was reclaiming some control, the whiskey fueling his reckless courage. "You think you're better than everyone else?" Mark retorted, anger bubbling to the surface. "Just because you can afford a suit, you think you can walk around like you own the place?" His words dripped with contempt, and he took another step forward, his fists clenching instinctively. The man remained unfazed, his expression shifting to one of quiet determination. "I'm just trying to get home," he replied, his voice steady. "I don't want any trouble." It was a response Mark didn't expect. Instead of backing down, he felt a rush of frustration. Who did this guy think he was? With each moment that passed, Mark felt his rage building, a dark energy consuming him. He didn't hear the warning bells in his mind. All he saw was a target for his anger, a way to channel his frustrations onto someone who seemed to represent all the things that made him feel small. "Trouble?" Mark laughed, the sound hollow and angry. "You think you can just stroll through my city and not face the consequences? You don't know anything about what people like me go through." His words came out sharper than intended, tinged with a bitterness that betrayed his own insecurities. The man took a measured breath, finally breaking the tension with a sigh. "You're clearly drunk and looking for a fight. I don't want any part of this." But Mark was too far gone to hear reason. The night had twisted his sense of reality, and he felt like a caged animal ready to strike. In that charged moment, as Mark stepped closer, the world around them faded into the background. It was just the two of them, locked in a clash of wills, a drunk officer seeking an outlet for his anger, and a composed man unwilling to back down. The tension crackled in the air, thick with the promise of violence. Mark's fist clenched tighter, and the inevitable collision of their worlds loomed closer with each heartbeat. 3. The altercation. The world narrowed to a point, every sound and light dimming around Officer Mark Tanner as he faced the well-dressed man across the street. The cool night air, once refreshing, now felt charged with tension. Mark's heart raced, his pulse echoing in his ears, as he readied himself for what he thought would be a simple display of force. Fueled by a mix of bravado and whiskey, he felt invincible, as though he could bend this moment to his will. "Hey!" Mark shouted, his words slurred but laden with aggression. "You think you can just walk through my city like you own it?" The man's brow furrowed in confusion, a hint of disappointment flickering in his eyes. He stood tall, unyielding, and Mark's bravado faltered for a brief moment. "Walk away, man," the stranger replied, his tone calm and collected. "I don't want any trouble." The man's poise infuriated Mark further. Here was someone seemingly untouched by the frustrations and challenges he faced daily, and that made him feel threatened. Mark's fingers curled into fists, his instincts screaming at him to assert dominance, to remind this man that he was an officer of the law, albeit a drunken one. Ignoring the warning bells ringing in his mind, Mark charged forward, closing the distance between them in an instant. "Trouble? You're the one looking for it," he spat, his voice dripping with contempt. As he swung his fist, he felt a rush of adrenaline surge through him, a moment of reckless abandon that drowned out any rational thought. The punch connected with a sickening thud, but instead of the satisfying impact Mark expected, the man absorbed the blow, barely stumbling back. Shocked, Mark stood frozen for a heartbeat, disbelief flashing across his face. He had struck first, and yet it felt as if he had attacked a stone wall. Regaining his footing, the man's expression shifted from surprise to determination. "Is that all you've got?" he challenged, his voice low and steady. The calmness of his demeanor fueled a flash of rage in Mark, who couldn't comprehend how this man could remain unfazed. Without waiting for a reply, the man launched himself forward, delivering a swift counterattack. The punch connected with Mark's jaw, and pain exploded across his face, causing stars to dance in his vision. Mark staggered backward, his hand flying to his face as he tasted blood. The humiliation washed over him like a wave, threatening to pull him under. He had initiated this fight, and now he was on the defensive, caught off guard by the man's speed and precision. "What the hell?" he gasped, trying to regain his balance. The once cocky officer now felt like a fool, standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down at the abyss of his own failures. As he blinked away the stars, Mark saw the man advancing toward him, unwavering and resolute. Panic shot through him. He could not afford to lose face, not now. The pressure of the moment heightened every instinct, pushing him to retaliate despite the sense of dread clawing at his gut. "You're just a suit in the wrong place!" Mark shouted, trying to reassert himself, to reclaim the narrative. But the man was relentless, and as Mark swung again, the punch was deftly dodged. "You don't have to do this," the man replied, frustration creeping into his voice. "You can still walk away." The words cut deeper than any physical blow could. It was a challenge, a chance to back down and rethink the choices he had made. Yet Mark's pride had swelled to the point of explosion, and he could not allow himself to retreat. With renewed ferocity, Mark charged forward once more, fists flying in a flurry of anger and desperation. Each swing felt more desperate than the last as he struggled to find his footing. The man, however, seemed to anticipate Mark's every move, countering with deft precision, dancing out of reach and retaliating with calculated strikes that left Mark reeling. The night had transformed into a brutal ballet of fists and anger, a dance that neither had anticipated. Sweat mingled with blood on Mark's forehead as he fought to maintain his composure. His mind raced, a chaotic jumble of thoughts, and the whiskey-induced haze began to clear, leaving behind a stark realization. This wasn't just a fight, this was a confrontation that forced him to reckon with everything he had buried deep inside. In a moment of chaotic desperation, Mark launched one final punch, but instead of connecting, he stumbled forward, throwing himself off balance. The man seized the opportunity, sidestepping and delivering a swift kick to Mark's side, sending him crashing to the ground. The cold pavement bit into Mark's skin as he gasped for breath, the air escaping his lungs in a sharp hiss. Lying on the ground, Mark's world spun. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a dawning awareness of the situation's absurdity. Here he was, an officer of the law, sprawled out in a street fight with a man he had disrespected just moments before. What had begun as a misguided attempt to assert dominance had turned into a brutal reality check. The man stood over him, breathing heavily, but his expression shifted from anger to something else, something more profound. "Get up," he said, his voice firm yet surprisingly calm. "You've had your fun. Now it's time to face the truth." Mark looked up at him, the fire of rage dwindling to a flicker as a new emotion bubbled to the surface: fear. "Who the hell are you?" Mark managed to spit out, trying to mask the vulnerability that now plagued him. He felt a swell of dread, the realization creeping in that this was not just about him or the fight. The man's presence loomed large, a reminder of the choices Mark had made that had led him to this moment. "I'm someone who won't stand for your bullshit," the man replied, his tone steady, "and I won't let you use that badge as an excuse to bully others." The words hung in the air, heavy with implications that Mark hadn't fully grasped until now. He had been blinded by anger and alcohol, caught in a spiral that had turned him into something he despised. As Mark pushed himself off the ground, he felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. This was more than a fight. It was a crossroads, a moment of reckoning that would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself and his role in the world. He faced the man, bruised but resolute, aware that the consequences of this encounter would reverberate far beyond the darkness of that night. The shocking reveal. In the midst of the chaotic clash, the world around them seemed to fade away, replaced by the sharp sounds of fists colliding and the grunts of exertion. Mark Tanner, fueled by adrenaline and the remnants of whiskey coursing through his veins, threw another punch. But this time, it was met with a swift and decisive block. The man he faced, seemingly unfazed, moved with a grace that betrayed the seriousness of the confrontation. It was clear that this was no ordinary fight. Mark's focus narrowed to the man's face, a mask of determination and calm that further infuriated him. With each passing moment, the weight of his decisions began to sink in. This was not just a random encounter, it was a collision of two lives, two realities that had become entwined in an unexpected way. Mark felt the panic rise in his chest, yet his ego propelled him forward. He couldn't back down now, not after throwing the first punch. In the middle of their brutal dance, a strange clarity began to emerge through the haze of rage and alcohol. Mark caught a glimpse of the man's eyes, a mixture of defiance and something else, something akin to disappointment. It was as if the man could see right through Mark, unearthing the fears and insecurities buried deep within him. Just as Mark prepared for another strike, the man took a step back, creating distance between them, and spoke in a low, steady voice. "Do you even know who I am?" he asked, the words slicing through the tension like a knife. Mark hesitated, confusion flickering across his features. In his drunken haze, he had failed to consider the man's identity, fixated instead on the need to prove himself in this ridiculous fight. "Who cares?" Mark spat, his bravado faltering. "You're just some suit walking the streets at night." But as the words left his mouth, an unsettling feeling gnawed at him. There was something about the man that seemed far too familiar, a subtle sense of recognition creeping in. Before Mark could contemplate further, the man reached into his jacket pocket, a motion that made Mark tense with anticipation. But instead of a weapon, he produced a leather wallet and flipped it open with practiced ease. The streetlight illuminated the inside, revealing an official identification card. "Robert Kane," it read, along with the words, "Mayor of City Name." Mark's heart dropped as reality crashed over him like a tidal wave. "Wait, you're the mayor?" he stammered, his bravado evaporating in an instant. The sheer gravity of the moment sent shockwaves through his mind. The man he had just assaulted, the person he had disrespected in the most violent way possible, was not just anyone. He was the leader of the very city Mark swore to protect. "Congratulations, Officer Tanner," Kane said, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "You've just assaulted the mayor of this city." The weight of those words hung heavily in the air, and the night's earlier bravado seemed to evaporate, leaving behind a suffocating silence. Mark felt his cheeks burn with a mix of shame and fear as he took a half-step back, the reality of the situation crashing down on him. All the anger that had propelled him into this altercation began to fade, replaced by a gnawing dread. What had he done? This wasn't just about his pride anymore. It was about the consequences of his actions. The very badge he wore, a symbol of authority and respect, now felt like a brand of shame. The implications of his aggression hit him hard. His career, his reputation, everything he had built was now at risk because of a moment of reckless fury. "Look, I'm sorry," Mark stammered, the words feeling inadequate as they left his lips. He was acutely aware of how weak and unconvincing they sounded, a stark contrast to the bluster he had exuded moments ago. Kane's expression remained inscrutable, a mix of disappointment and resolve. "Sorry doesn't cut it, Tanner," the mayor replied, his tone unyielding. "You've crossed a line, and it's not just about you anymore. This city deserves better from its officers." The words struck Mark harder than any punch could. This was not just about his failure. It was a reflection of a system that was already under scrutiny. a reminder of the deep-seated issues that plagued their community. As the weight of Kane's words sank in, Mark felt the world spinning around him. The night had shifted from a simple drunken escapade to a turning point that would ripple through their lives. The mayor's unwavering gaze seemed to pierce through Mark's defenses, forcing him to confront the man he had become, a man fueled by anger, prejudice, and a desperate need for control. "Listen, I don't know what's going to happen next," Kane continued, his voice now softer yet still firm. "But we can't let this go unnoticed. You need to take responsibility for your actions. I'll give you a choice. Face the consequences now, or help me address the issues within the police force and the community." Mark's mind raced as he processed the offer, torn between the two paths laid before him. On one hand, he could choose the easy way out, face the repercussions of his assault, and possibly lose everything. On the other hand, he could accept Kane's unexpected proposal, a chance to redeem himself and confront the biases that had led him to this moment. In that moment of reckoning, Mark realized that the fight was not just with the man standing before him, but also within himself. The choice loomed large, and he knew that whatever decision he made would define not only his future, but also the future of the city he had sworn to protect. 5. The aftermath. The air felt electric, thick with tension, as Mark Tanner struggled to regain his footing. He wiped the blood from his mouth with the back of his hand, still reeling from the confrontation. The street seemed eerily quiet, the sounds of the city muffled by the weight of what had just occurred. The man, Robert Kane, stood across from him, calm but seething, the authority of his presence palpable even in the aftermath of violence. "Get up," Kane urged again, his voice steady but firm. "This isn't over." Mark looked up at him, a mix of anger and embarrassment flooding his senses. The pounding in his head echoed the chaos of the fight. But beneath the layers of fury lay a growing sense of shame. He had let himself be consumed by rage, by a need to prove something that had now spiraled out of control. "I said get up," Kane insisted, stepping closer, the anger still simmering just below the surface. "You need to confront what you've done, not just to me, but to anyone who looks up to you as a figure of authority." The weight of those words hit Mark hard. He could feel the shame creeping in, a realization that he had not just let himself down, but had also tarnished the badge he wore. Struggling to find his voice, Mark pushed himself up from the ground, his body protesting every movement. "What do you want from me?" he asked, the defiance in his voice feeling weak against the gravity of the moment. The night felt heavy, as if the darkness itself was watching and waiting for his next move. "I want you to understand the consequences of your actions," Kane replied, his voice unwavering. "This city deserves better than a drunk officer throwing punches at a citizen. You have a responsibility to protect, not to harm." Mark clenched his fists, his knuckles white as the anger bubbled back to the surface. "You don't know what it's like," he shouted, the words bursting forth in a torrent of frustration. "You sit in your office, making decisions while people like me have to deal with the real world. The violence, the chaos, you think it's easy?" Kane's gaze softened, but his resolve remained. "I know more than you think, Mark. I've seen the struggles, the violence. That's why I'm here. To change things, to help people like you find a better path. But I can't do that if you're out here fighting on the streets." The sincerity in his voice cut through Mark's anger, and for a fleeting moment he felt a connection, a glimpse of understanding that made him uneasy. The realization of his actions loomed large over him. The brawl had started as an attempt to assert his power, but it had revealed the fragility of that power. "I'm not a monster," Mark murmured, more to himself than to Kane. I just lost control." "Then take control of your life," Kane urged, stepping closer, his tone shifting to one of encouragement. You can't keep hiding behind that badge as an excuse for your behavior. You need to confront what's driving you to this point. Mark looked down at the ground, shame flooding his chest. The world around him had shifted. This confrontation had stripped away the layers of bravado he had built over the years. He had spent so long trying to uphold an image of strength that he had lost sight of what it meant to truly protect and serve. He felt exposed, vulnerable, and he didn't know how to face the consequences. Just then, a siren echoed in the distance, a reminder of the world they were both part of. Mark's heart raced as he glanced around, fear creeping in. "What if they come here?" he asked, panic lacing his voice. The thought of being caught, of facing disciplinary action for what had just happened, sent a shiver down his spine. "They will," Kane replied, his expression serious. "But it's not just about getting caught. It's about what you do next. You have a choice to make." "What choice?" Mark spat, bitterness creeping into his voice. "I've already messed everything up." "You can choose to be better," Kane asserted, his gaze steady. "You can admit your mistakes, take responsibility for them, and work to change. Or you can continue down this path and watch everything you care about crumble." The words hung in the air, resonating deeply within Mark's troubled mind. As the sirens grew louder, Mark felt the weight of the moment press down on him. He could already picture the headlines, "Officer arrested for assaulting mayor." His heart sank at the thought of his career crashing down around him, the judgment of his peers, the disappointment of his family. "What if I don't want to change?" Mark asked, a hint of desperation in his voice. "What if I just want to go back to the way things were?" "Then you'll lose everything," Kane replied bluntly, his words ringing with harsh truth. "But if you're willing to confront this, your anger, your prejudices, you might just find a path to redemption." The sirens were now only a few blocks away, and Mark could feel the adrenaline coursing through him, but not in the way it had moments before. This was a different kind of rush, a reckoning that threatened to swallow him whole. The chaos of the night had shattered his perception of himself, and now he stood at a crossroads. Mark's fists unclenched, and he took a deep breath, the air heavy with the weight of his choices. Could he really change? Would he have the strength to confront the demons that had driven him to this moment? The fear of losing everything warred with a newfound desire for something greater, a chance to redefine his role, to fight for justice rather than against it. The sirens wailed, growing louder, and as Mark glanced at Kane, he saw not just the mayor, but a man who had fought against his own battles, someone who understood the complexities of their world. In that moment, Mark made a decision. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steadier than before. "I'll take responsibility. I'll change." The words felt heavy but liberating, a promise made in the wake of chaos. Kane nodded, a flicker of approval crossing his face. "Then let's get out of here before they arrive. We have work to do." Together they turned away from the confrontation, leaving the remnants of the fight behind them. Mark knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges he had yet to face, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope. The choice was his, and it was time to forge a new path, one rooted in understanding, respect, and true leadership. 6. A call to action. The drive back to the precinct was filled with an uncomfortable silence, the weight of the night's events hanging heavy in the air. Mark Tanner gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white as he tried to process everything that had transpired. Beside him, Robert Kane remained quiet, his gaze focused on the road ahead, a stern expression etched across his features. The tension in the car was palpable, a mix of uncertainty and determination. As they pulled into the precinct parking lot, the glow of the fluorescent lights illuminated the building, stark and unyielding. Mark took a deep breath, feeling the gravity of the moment settle in. This was not just another night shift. It was the beginning of a turning point in his life. The prospect of facing his colleagues and the consequences of his actions filled him with dread, but he also felt a flicker of resolve igniting within him. "We need to talk to the chief," Kane said, breaking the silence as they exited the car. His voice was calm, but there was an underlying urgency that Mark couldn't ignore. "You need to be honest about what happened tonight. No more hiding." Mark nodded, his throat dry. "I know. I'll tell him everything." But doubt crept in. Would they believe him? Would they see him as the officer he had once been, or as the man who had assaulted the mayor? The shame loomed large, threatening to engulf him. But he knew this was the first step in reclaiming his integrity. As they entered the precinct, the familiar sights and sounds rushed back, a cacophony of voices and ringing phones. It felt surreal to be amidst his fellow officers after the chaos of the night. But there was no turning back now. The precinct buzzed with activity, officers gathered around desks, some sharing jokes, others deep in conversation about the day's cases. Mark's heart raced as he walked through the halls, each step feeling heavier than the last. "Mark!" a fellow officer called out, interrupting his thoughts. It was Dave, a younger officer with an easy smile. "You all right? Heard there was some drama tonight." Mark forced a smile, but it felt strained. "Yeah, just a little misunderstanding." He could feel Kane's presence beside him, a steady reminder of the reality he could no longer ignore. "Misunderstanding?" Dave raised an eyebrow, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "More like a fight, I'd say. Heard you were involved. Is it true you took on the mayor?" Mark glanced at Kane, who met his gaze with an encouraging nod. "It's true," he said, his voice steady, "and I need to speak to Chief Reynolds about it. It's important." Dave's expression shifted from amusement to concern. "Oh, man, that doesn't sound good. You know how the chief is about discipline. You really want to do this?" "I have to," Mark replied, the conviction in his voice surprising even him. "I can't hide from it anymore." As they approached the chief's office, the weight of anticipation hung in the air. Mark's stomach churned, but he pressed on, fueled by a mixture of fear and determination. This was his moment to confront not only his mistakes, but also the culture within the department that had allowed him to spiral so far out of control. Kane stood beside him, a steady presence, and as they knocked on the chief's door, Mark felt a surge of adrenaline. "Come in!" Chief Reynolds' voice boomed from the other side, commanding and authoritative. Mark pushed the door open, stepping into the chief's office. The room was adorned with framed accolades and photographs of the precinct's accomplishments. Chief Reynolds sat behind his desk, his expression shifting from casual to serious as he took in the sight of Mark and Kane. "What's going on?" he asked, a hint of curiosity lacing his voice. "Chief, I need to talk to you about what happened tonight," Mark began, his voice steady but laced with tension. "It's about the altercation I had with Mayor Kane." The chief leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "I heard a bit about that. People are saying you lost your temper. Is that true?" Mark felt the heat rise in his cheeks. "Yes, it's true. I let my anger get the best of me, and I hit him. It was completely uncalled for." Kane stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. "I can confirm what Mark is saying. This wasn't just a simple fight. He acted out of anger, and I believe he deserves a chance to explain himself." Reynolds looked between them, assessing the situation. "Mark, you know that as an officer, you have a responsibility to uphold the law, not to break it. This is serious." "I understand," Mark replied, his voice filled with sincerity, "but I also realize that I can't pretend this didn't happen. I need to take responsibility for my actions, and I want to work towards making things better, not just for myself, but for the department and the community." The chief's gaze softened slightly, but the gravity of the situation remained. "And how do you propose to do that?" Mark took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. I want to engage with the community more, to address the issues of trust and transparency that have plagued our department. I want to hold myself accountable and encourage my fellow officers to do the same. We need to change the culture from within. Kane nodded in agreement, adding, I'm willing to work with you, Chief. Together, we can bridge the gap between law enforcement and the community. But it starts with acknowledging the problems and taking actionable steps to fix them. The room fell silent as Chief Reynolds considered their words, the weight of their request hanging in the air. Mark's heart raced. This was a pivotal moment, one that could define the rest of his career and reshape his identity as an officer. Finally, the chief spoke. I appreciate your honesty, Mark. It takes courage to admit when you're wrong. But understand this. It's going to be a long and difficult road. You'll need to earn back the trust of your colleagues and the community. Are you prepared for that? I am, Mark replied firmly, a newfound determination filling his voice. I want to do whatever it takes. Reynolds nodded, his expression turning thoughtful. All right. We'll start with a meeting with the community leaders. I want you to explain what happened and your intentions moving forward. It won't be easy, but if you're serious about this, it could make a real difference. Mark felt a rush of relief and fear all at once. This was it, the first step toward redemption. Thank you, Chief. I won't let you down. As they exited the office, Mark felt a weight lift off his shoulders, but another one settled in its place. He knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of purpose rekindled within him. I admire your courage, Mark, Kane said as they walked down the hallway. This isn't going to be easy, but you've taken the first step. Remember, change starts with individuals willing to confront their own flaws. Mark nodded, feeling a flicker of hope ignite in his chest. I won't forget that. It's time for me to step up and be the officer this city deserves. Together they walked into the precinct, ready to face whatever came next, united in their mission to foster understanding, accountability, and ultimately change. The journey would be long and arduous, but Mark Tanner was ready to rise to the challenge and fight for a better future. 7. Community engagement. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity as Mark Tanner embraced his new mission. The path to redemption was paved with community meetings, outreach initiatives, and countless conversations with citizens and fellow officers alike. Each day brought its own challenges, but also the opportunity to redefine himself, to rebuild the trust he had broken. Mark found himself stepping into unfamiliar territory as he engaged with the community he had once distanced himself from. His first official meeting was at the local community center, a vibrant hub bustling with activity. He could feel the tension in the air as he entered, the eyes of community members on him, some filled with skepticism, others with curiosity. Thank you for coming, he began, his voice steady but his heart racing. I know I've made mistakes, and I'm here to own them. I want to listen to your concerns and work together to improve our relationship. The room was filled with a mix of murmurs and silence, the community members absorbing his words. One woman, an elder with a piercing gaze, stood up, her expression unwavering. You say you want to listen, but how can we trust you after what you did to Mayor Kane? You were supposed to protect us. Mark felt the weight of her words hit him like a punch to the gut. I understand your anger, he replied, sincerity pouring from him. I let my emotions cloud my judgment. I'm here to tell you that I'm committed to changing, not just for myself, but for this entire community. I want to work with you, not against you. Another voice cut through the tension. Actions speak louder than words, Officer Tanner. What are you actually going to do to make things better? Mark nodded, acknowledging the challenge. I've been working with Mayor Kane to create initiatives focused on community engagement, transparency, and accountability. We want to establish regular town hall meetings where you can voice your concerns and ask questions directly. I'll be here, ready to listen. The murmurs in the room began to shift, a sense of cautious optimism weaving its way through the crowd. They had been hurt, disappointed by a system that seemed to prioritize authority over community. But here was Mark, standing before them, acknowledging his failures and seeking a partnership instead of a power struggle. "What else?" a young man in the back shouted, his arms crossed defiantly. "What about the incidents we've had in this neighborhood? The harassment, the violence? How do we know that you're not just saying what we want to hear?" "I can't change what's happened in the past," Mark admitted, his voice steady, despite the challenging atmosphere. "But I can promise you that moving forward, I will work to hold myself and my fellow officers accountable. We need to establish a community advisory board where residents can provide feedback on police practices and policies. Your voices matter, and they will be heard." Slowly, hands began to raise, questions and comments flowing from the crowd. The discussion shifted from anger to curiosity as Mark found himself engaged in a dialogue he had long avoided. Each question brought him closer to understanding the depth of the community's grievances and the nuances of their experiences. Hours passed as the meeting unfolded, each voice contributing to a tapestry of frustration, hope, and determination. Mark felt a shift within himself. The fear that had initially gripped him transformed into a commitment to see this through. He realized that healing would take time and trust wouldn't be rebuilt overnight, but he was willing to put in the effort. As the meeting drew to a close, the elder woman who had initially questioned him stood again, her expression softer now. "I appreciate your willingness to listen, Officer Tanner, but you must know that it's not just about words. We will be watching your actions." Mark nodded, feeling the weight of her expectations. "I understand. I won't take this lightly. I'm committed to doing the work necessary to regain your trust." When the meeting finally ended, Mark stepped outside into the cool evening air, the weight of the world on his shoulders, but a flicker of hope lighting his path. Kane met him at the door, a proud smile on his face. "You did well in there," he said. "You faced tough questions, and you handled them with grace." "I just hope they believe me," Mark replied, still feeling the gravity of their skepticism. "I know it's going to take time." "Change doesn't happen overnight," Kane agreed. "But you've taken a significant step today. You opened the door to a conversation that needed to happen." In the weeks that followed, Mark immersed himself in community initiatives. He attended neighborhood events, organized youth programs, and participated in discussions about public safety. Each interaction, every handshake, and every story shared helped bridge the gap that had formed between the police and the community. One evening, while volunteering at a local youth center, Mark found himself playing basketball with a group of teenagers. The laughter and joy that filled the air felt foreign, but refreshing, a stark contrast to the tension he had grown accustomed to. The kids challenged him to keep up, and for the first time in ages, he felt the thrill of connection, a reminder of why he had become an officer in the first place. As they played, one of the teenagers, a boy named Malik, caught his eye. "Yo, Officer Tanner," he called out, panting heavily as he dribbled the ball. "You're not like other cops. You actually care." Mark paused, surprised by the compliment. "Thanks, Malik. I'm trying to do better. I want you to feel safe talking to me or any of the other officers." "Yeah, but we've been through a lot," Malik admitted, his youthful face turning serious. "It's hard to trust. You gotta show us you're different." Mark nodded, understanding the weight of those words. "I know it won't be easy, but I promise I'm committed to changing that. I'm here for you guys." The summer days turned into weeks, and as Mark continued his outreach, he began to see the ripple effects of his efforts. More community members attended the town hall meetings, more conversations took place, and slowly but surely, trust began to rebuild. One afternoon, as he sat in the precinct, going over notes for the upcoming community meeting, his phone buzzed with a message from Kane. "Hey, we're making progress. Let's meet later to discuss our next steps." Mark smiled at the message, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. They were no longer just two individuals from different worlds. They were partners in a mission to reshape the community and the department. Later that evening, as they sat in Kane's office, the atmosphere felt electric with potential. "I think we should start a mentorship program," Kane suggested. "Pair officers with kids from the community. It could break down barriers and help foster understanding." "That's a great idea," Mark replied, enthusiasm bubbling to the surface. "We could organize activities, mentorship opportunities, and even career days. Show them that we're here to support them, not intimidate them." Kane nodded, excitement evident in his expression. "Let's pitch it at the next town hall. We can get community input on how to make it work." As they planned, Mark felt a shift within him, a sense of belonging he had longed for since the altercation. He was no longer just an officer wearing a badge. He was a catalyst for change, a bridge between the police and the community. Together, they could create a safer, more inclusive environment for everyone. As days turned into weeks, the momentum continued to build. The mentorship program gained traction, and officers began volunteering their time to connect with local youth. Mark's passion fueled his work, and he became a beacon of hope for those seeking change. One evening, as he sat on his porch reflecting on the journey so far, he thought about how far he had come. From a drunken brawl to becoming an advocate for change. It felt surreal. The phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Kane. "Great turnout at the meeting tonight. The community is behind us." Mark's heart swelled with pride. The road had been long and fraught with challenges, but he was learning that change was possible, and it started with accountability, honesty, and genuine connection. He realized that healing was a journey he was more than ready to embark on, one step at a time. 8. Redemption. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden hue over the city as Mark Tanner prepared for the most important meeting of his career. After weeks of outreach, discussions, and building bridges, tonight's town hall was more than just another gathering. It was a pivotal moment that could define the future of the community-police relationship in their city. In the days leading up to this event, the atmosphere had shifted noticeably. The community had begun to engage with law enforcement in a way that hadn't been seen in years. Mark felt a sense of excitement mingled with anxiety as he organized his notes, hoping to articulate his vision clearly. He was determined to not only represent himself, but to embody the hopes and aspirations of the community he had come to love and respect. As he arrived at the community center, he was greeted by a buzz of energy. Residents were milling about, exchanging stories and laughter. Mark felt a sense of belonging as he spotted familiar faces. Community leaders, families, and the teenagers he had met during his outreach efforts. They had all come to discuss the future, and he was grateful to have earned their trust. The meeting commenced with Mayor Kane stepping up to the podium, his voice strong and assured. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, looking out over the crowd. "We've been through a lot, and the journey hasn't been easy, but I believe we are on the brink of something transformative." Mark stood off to the side, watching as the mayor spoke. He felt a swell of pride. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about their collective commitment to change. After Kane finished his introduction, he gestured for Mark to join him at the podium. "Now, I'd like to introduce Officer Mark Tanner," Kane said, a hint of encouragement in his voice. "He's been at the forefront of our community outreach efforts, and I believe he has something important to share with all of us." As Mark stepped forward, he felt the weight of the room's expectations settle upon him. "Thank you, Mayor Kane," he began, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. "I stand before you today not just as a police officer, but as someone who deeply values this community and understands the importance of trust and accountability." He scanned the audience, locking eyes with various individuals, some supportive, others still skeptical. "I know I have made mistakes," he continued, his voice steady, "but I am here to tell you that I am committed to earning your trust back. Together, we can create a police department that serves the community, not one that fears it." The room was silent, every ear tuned into his words. "We're launching a mentorship program that pairs officers with youth from our neighborhoods. This isn't just about teaching, it's about listening, learning, and understanding one another. We want to break down barriers and foster genuine relationships." A hand shot up from the audience, a young woman named Mia, who had attended several meetings. "How can we be sure this program will actually change things?" she asked, her voice filled with earnestness. Mark smiled, grateful for the question. "It's a valid concern, Mia. Change doesn't happen overnight. But we're committing to regular evaluations of this program. We want your feedback. Your voices will shape how we move forward." Another member of the audience, an older gentleman, spoke up. "What about accountability? How will we know officers are actually held responsible for their actions?" Mark nodded, acknowledging the importance of accountability. "We're working on establishing a community advisory board that will include residents, local leaders, and officers. This board will review policies, investigate complaints, and ensure that our practices reflect the values of the community." As the discussion continued, Mark felt a growing connection with the audience. He could see the shift in their attitudes, a sense of cautious optimism emerging as they began to engage more actively. Questions flew, ideas were exchanged, and Mark relished every moment of it. Towards the end of the meeting, the atmosphere was charged with enthusiasm. Mark felt hopeful as community members began to share their own ideas for improvement. "We need to hold cultural events together," suggested a local artist. "We need to celebrate our diversity." "Yes," Mark replied, his excitement palpable. "Let's plan community festivals, sports events, and art shows that highlight our shared culture. We want to create opportunities for everyone to come together." As the meeting concluded, a sense of accomplishment washed over Mark. He had taken a step toward redemption, but it was only the beginning. The community had embraced his vision, and he could feel the energy shift, the tentative trust beginning to blossom. After the meeting, as attendees mingled and exchanged contact information, Mark caught sight of the elder woman from the earlier meeting. She approached him, her expression thoughtful. "You spoke from your heart tonight, Officer Tanner. It's clear you care about this community." "Thank you," he replied, feeling genuine gratitude for her words. "I'm committed to making this work." "Just remember," she cautioned, "trust is built slowly, and it can be lost in an instant. Stay true to your word." "I will," Mark assured her, his resolve strengthening. As the night wound down and the last of the attendees filtered out, Mark lingered, reflecting on the evening's success. Kane approached him, a proud smile on his face. "You did it, Mark. The community responded. You showed them that you're willing to put in the work." "I couldn't have done it without your support," Mark replied, feeling a profound sense of gratitude toward the mayor. "Thank you for believing in me." "Let's keep this momentum going," Kane said, his tone serious yet hopeful. "We have a long road ahead, but I believe we're finally heading in the right direction." In the weeks that followed, the changes started to take root. The mentorship program kicked off, pairing officers with eager youth ready to build relationships. Mark found himself working closely with Malik, the teenager he had met during the basketball games. Together, they organized events that fostered connections between police officers and the community. Mark also continued to meet with the Community Advisory Board, addressing concerns, gathering feedback, and actively seeking ways to improve. With each meeting, he could feel the trust slowly rebuilding, the gap narrowing between law enforcement and the citizens they served. One Saturday afternoon, as they hosted a community block party, Mark stood alongside Kane, watching families enjoy the festivities. Laughter filled the air as children played games, neighbors exchanged stories, and officers mingled with the residents. "This is what it's all about," Kane said, a satisfied smile on his face, "building relationships and trust." Mark nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "I never thought I'd be standing here after everything that happened. It feels good to see the community come together." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting vibrant hues across the sky, Mark took a moment to reflect on his journey. The road to redemption had been challenging, filled with doubts and fears, but it had also been incredibly rewarding. He had learned that true change began with accountability, honesty, and an unwavering commitment to the community. The weight of his past mistakes no longer felt like a burden. Instead, it had become a catalyst for growth and transformation. In that moment, surrounded by laughter and connection, Mark Tanner realized he was no longer just a cop struggling for redemption. He was a part of something bigger, a movement toward understanding, compassion, and change that would ripple through the community for years to come. As the festivities continued and the stars began to twinkle above, Mark knew that while the journey ahead would still have its challenges, he was ready to face them head-on. Together with the community, they were forging a new path, one built on trust, respect, and a shared vision for a brighter future. Lesson from the story: the power of redemption and community connection. The journey of Officer Mark Tanner teaches us that redemption is possible through accountability, humility, and a willingness to listen. When he made a grievous mistake, it could have easily defined him forever, marking him as just another disgraced officer. However, he chose to confront his past head-on, recognizing that true change begins with self-reflection and taking responsibility for one's actions. Mark's transformation emphasizes the importance of communication and understanding within a community. By engaging openly with residents, he learned the value of their experiences and concerns. This dialogue fostered trust, allowing for meaningful relationships to develop between law enforcement and the community they serve. Moreover, the story highlights that change is a collective effort. Mark's initiatives, like the mentorship program, underscore that progress is best achieved when everyone works together toward a common goal. It's about creating spaces where diverse voices can be heard and celebrated, ultimately leading to a stronger, more unified community. In essence, the lesson is clear. Redemption is not an individual journey but a communal one. It is about listening, learning, and growing together, transforming past mistakes into opportunities for healing and connection. The road to redemption may be long, but with commitment and collaboration, it leads to a brighter future for all.